Thanks for joining me. In this video we're going to discuss the changes and issues that have come across as a part of the self-employed model over the last couple of years. I'm going to cover what this means and what it means in the general view of what self-employed looks like, or what it should look like. What changes have happened and where they've come from. And you know, there has been significant change in some legislation, but also in the way the legislation is interpreted. And then also how the change affects the self-employed model. So we've got quite a high percentage of our industry here in the UK who are self-employed hairdressers. The NHBF at one point said that was 60%. More recently they've used the term 40%. I know that if you look at the back end of HMRC and their data, then you'll find that it depends on where you are in the country, and it can range anywhere between 60 to 87%, somewhere around that range. And that's the more useful data, the one that comes from HMRC, as opposed to the NHBF sending out a survey and the NHBF members, because not everyone's a member of the NHBF, answering and then getting their data from that. So a simple concept is self-employed. It's become a cultural norm, and it is a cultural norm in the sense that I grew up in Australia, because obviously accent, and I trained in Australia, and I moved to the UK about 20 years ago. And in the 22 years that I've lived in the UK, I've never actually been on the payroll in any shop that I've worked in unless I've owned it, and it's my limited company that's paid me through the payroll. So self-employed is a very simple concept here in the UK, and I'm talking specifically about the cultural impact of self-employed within the UK. I'm aware that, and obviously I'm a hairdresser, I've been around for a bit and I'm quite knowledgeable, so we know we have booth renters in the US, and there are similar issues in the US to do with 1099 employers, but I'm not going to go into them. You may find that if you're watching this in the US that some of the information overlaps, which is fine. It's likely to, because employment law is very similar no matter where you are. It just depends on your jurisdiction. But let's kick off, and if we have a look at a salon growing. So let's just take a normal salon growing from one person, and this barber, hairdresser, we're going to call them stylist for the period of the video because it makes it easier, but this does encompass hairdressing and barbering, and actually it's not just our industry. There are other industries that have these issues as well. But a stylist decides to open their own shop. They open their own shop, they get their space or premises, and let's assume over a period of a couple of months, 6 months maybe, they start to grow, which is the normal thing. It's a natural occurrence that happens. Now, once they get to this point, they then have to make a decision. Do they just keep doing what they're doing, or do they bring someone else in? Now, if they bring someone else in, that then makes them what's called an engager. So regardless of how you bring them in, whether it be under the self-employed model or the employed model, when they come into your shop and start working with you together, you are engaging them under the legal parlance or speak of the law. So at this point you have two legitimate choices. Now, there's a lot of fair playing field talk, there's a lot of we should ban the model, we should do this. The big picture, or the reality, is that going self-employed or having a self-employed model is a legitimate choice that you can make as a business owner. And the choices you have is you can employ someone, and that means that they have employment rights, pensions, national insurance. If you go above the threshold, you're liable for VAT, and it means that you need cash flow from the get-go. You need to be able to get that stylist in, generate enough income to cover their wages, your costs, and the profit. And that becomes a difficult sort of thing to do, especially if you're a single operator and you're growing, as the model I'm using shows. The next option is self-employed, and effectively, in the self-employed, you don't have any of those issues. There is no employment rights, there's no pension, no national insurance, and in terms of that, if you were doing the commission previously, which I believe people are not doing anymore and they shouldn't be doing, it meant that you were only accounting for the percentage that you got as a salon owner, not the whole percent. Now, or the whole amount. There'll be more on that in a minute, because that creates a bit of an issue further down. So self-employed, at the moment you're basically renting your chair out. So you get the amount coming in for the rent for the chair, and makes life easier, clients are happy, everyone gets serviced, we can all keep growing. Okay, so again, I want to be very clear. Both of these decisions, self-employed or employed, are legitimate business decisions. You can legitimately make the decision to do a self-employed salon, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. However, both have an overlapping law. Now, if you look at the employed side, I'm going to throw a slide up here, you have employment rights and employment law, and on the self-employed side, you have to cover what's called the NHBF guidelines, which is kind of the opposite to the employment rights and the employment law. Both of them, however, have to deal with HMRC, and they have to work within the HMRC rules. Now, the NHBF guidelines were agreed with the HMRC, and they're agreed with the HMRC based on how you're engaging, and that word engage is going to come up quite a bit, so be clear if you know what it means. It means that you have someone working with or for you in your business. So, let's move on. Let's break these down. Employment right has legislation and judgment. So we have the Employment Rights Act, I believe it's 1996, it was changed again in 2004 again, and again, the big one, it was changed in 2020. Now, that's legislation that the government draw up. The government draw it up, write it, publish it, it passes through Parliament, the House of Lords, gets royal assent, and it becomes the law of the land. So we have that. We have that legislation. It's a body of text that says you can and you can't do this. Then on top of that, we have what's called judgments. This is where the judiciary, and namely it's either the tribunal or a civil court, rules on their interpretation or the interpretation of the law. So law can change based on how the judiciary interpret it. And this is effectively what's happened in a lot of cases like Deliveroo, Plimco Plumbings, and yes, in our industry as well. So the test that's used normally, and there are a couple of tests here, but normally the test that's used to test whether someone is an employee or not an employee is the ready-mix concrete test. Now, the ready-mix concrete test says there's three classifications. You have either an employee, a worker, or self-employed. That's employment law. They will say there are those three classifications. HMRC will say you're either employed or self-employed. They don't recognise the worker. They lump that in with the employee or employer. And that's for tax purposes, and generally it's about centralisation of gaining or gathering the income in the business. So back in the 90s, and I believe it was 96, the NHBF agreed guidelines with HMRC. Here's the link. Now, these guidelines for self-employed, and if you look at them, they're basically the opposite of what the employment is. What they show you is that if you're following these guidelines, and you don't need to follow every single one perfectly, you need to be the general, or the overriding intention needs to be that you are following these guidelines. However, at the moment, I would suggest you follow all of them perfectly. So, let's look at them. You have employed or self-employed. And the three things that come up in the ready-mix concrete test, just to slip back into that for a second, are the test for someone's employed or not is whether there is a personal service. So they have to do it themselves. Control. So that means that there's no control over that person that you've engaged. Mutuality of obligation, or some people have called this MOO, which is a horrible acronym, but mutuality of obligation. That means that I'm obliged as the engager or the salon owner to go find clients, and you're obliged to do those clients. That doesn't matter whether those were my clients already and I just said, yeah, can you do that one? That's mutuality of obligation. You're saying, hey, there's a client here, can you do it? They've got to do it. There we go. So, embedded in the salon. So embedded or integrated into the salon. Now that could be anything from, well, I mean, it could be anything from you control their prices, you give them clients that are shared between, but in general, if they're embedded in the salon or integrated into the salon, then you're a problem. So the guidelines, and if we look at it in two tables here, which I'm going to put up, control is employed, self-employed is no control. Mutuality of obligation is employed, and no obligation is self-employed. Embedded in the salon is employed, and independent is self-employed. The guidance are, in essence, the opposite of legislation, in my opinion. Now, I'm not a lawyer. I am very schooled on this. I really do understand what's going on. I'm one of the few people that I get a lot of phone calls, like on a weekly basis from people who are trying to wrap their heads around this and relay it to our salon industry. But I'm not a lawyer, but from my opinion, and it is an opinion, the legislation that talks of what the guidance says, or the guidance, sorry, not the legislation, is pretty much showing how you can demonstrate that you're not adhering to that legislation of employment law. And that's what I mean by these are kind of opposites, if that makes sense. And I'm pretty sure it does. So let's just look at a little timeline here. The timeline, if we go back to 1996, now HMRC actually lost a case in 1996, I believe, that was about self-employed, and it was in the salon industry. So in 96, HMRC and the NHBF sat down and said, okay, we're going to agree these guidelines. Those guidelines have been published since 1996. Move on, nothing really changed. We were allowed to get on with it, and we all got on with it. And, certainly for me, I got here in 2000, and again, I never worked as an employee in a salon as a hairdresser. Nothing really changed, except a couple of things changed outside our industry. And those things that changed outside our industry were that the internet came along and online shopping. And suddenly we had all these premises that were empty on the high street. So as people took their business models off of the traditional high street and traditional retailing and put them online, we ended up with a lot more premises. So what do? Hairdressers, we go, okay, we're going to be self-employed, well, I can do it myself. So we had this explosion of salons across the country, in particular barber shops. And, this hit the news for a while in 2010, I think, 2014, somewhere around there, saying that there was so many coming in and it's such a lucrative trade, etc. Not really reporting that very well, if you ask me. But in terms of legislation and how this works in the self-employed model, the only thing that really changed was in around 2007. So there was a case in 2007 where it was ruled effectively that you can't draw a line around a map. So you can't just draw a box around a chair on a map of the salon and say that you're supplying land. And that's quite significant, because if we could say that we're supplying land, then that has other tax implications, and it means that, well, we're not self-employing someone, we're supplying them land. Now, that legislation basically says, or that judgment basically says, you're not supplying land, you're supplying the land and all of the other provisions to carry on business as a hairdresser, barber. It works the same for a tattooist or a beauty therapist. In 2018, a heating engineer, a plumber, he won a landmark case, and this went through to the Supreme Court. Now, this kind of kicked off a lot of challenges in tribunal. He was basically a self-employed plumber in London, and in effect, he was VAT registered, chose his own hours, did his own thing, but he was deemed to be disguised employee for the purpose of the Equal Opportunities Act. And that's important at that time for that case. This then kicked off quite a few other cases. And believe it or not, quite a few of them, or some of them at least, are in hair industry, hairdressing. So in 2018, we started to have this microscope coming in on the relationship between self-employed individuals and employed individuals. Around about the same time, in fact it was earlier because I was in colleges at the time, that IR35 started happening. Now, I have to be really clear here. If anyone is advising you that you can do self-employed based on IR35, then you need to get someone else to advise you. IR35 is for businesses who have over 5 million in turnover, I believe it is, and have over a certain amount of staff. It is for big companies. Now, how the government work with these things when they start to look at compliance is they go for the big ones first, then they go for the middle ones, and then they go for the little fish. And at the moment, we're obviously the little fish. Well, most of us are the little fish. The great majority, 1 or 2% might go into the middle ones. But as the little fish, it's just become our turn. The legislation behind IR35, in other words, what creates the things, is the same ready-mix concrete test. But the legislation we need to be looking at was a change that came in 2020. So while we were all crying under our duvets, trying to avoid the plague, and COVID was rampant and our shops were shut, the government put through something like 20 changes to legislation, including what's called the Good Working Guide. Now, if I've got that wrong, I'll put it on the screen because I'm dyslexic, so sometimes I get that wrong. So the Good Working Guide basically means that we're responsible for working out if people are self-employed or not. It's that simple. So the problem we have here is that if we go back to our timeline, since 1996, we've kind of blurred the lines. We didn't get really any scrutiny between 96 and sort of the end of the 2010s, so 2018, 2019. So there wasn't really a lot of scrutiny, and that scrutiny was only known by a few people who were really sadly into reading that kind of thing, such as myself. But in that time, we've kind of blurred the lines of what is self-employed and what isn't self-employed. So we've basically, we go to recruit someone, and you know, cards on table here, I grew to 4 salons by using the self-employed model. And if I were to be investigated today for what I was doing then, I'd lose everything. I would nowhere near compliant. But culturally, I was doing exactly what everyone else was doing. I had more clients coming in, so I put in an ad, self-employed hairdresser. Along came self-employed hairdresser. Yeah, you can go self-employed. Oh no, we've got plenty of clients. Yeah, you'll earn good money. And that's the issue. As soon as we go, we've got plenty of clients, you'll earn good money, we're creating mutuality of obligation. Because we're supplying the clients to someone who is technically and theoretically a completely different separate entity. And that entity should be building their own clients and doing their own advertising. So that'll come along again. So we didn't get a lot of scrutiny until sort of 2018-19, and then at that point we got the start of the tribunal starting to see what was going on in salons. Let's look at how it should look. And if we look at the guidelines, and you know, I'm just going to put screenshots of the guidelines up because I'm not that clever with my video editing. But if you have self-employed engaged in your shop, they should or must have, 1, their own clients, not yours, or mixed between stylists. And that's a really important one because that's integrating them into the business. They should have control of their prices. It should be different from all others, and you should have nothing to do with it. So if they can demonstrate as a stylist that you help them set their prices, and you said, oh, you know, you get more work at this level as opposed to this level, then you're creating control. Signage and branding and their own contract. Now, their own contract is a biggie. They should have a contract that clearly describes everything as the guidelines show, and I'll put that up here. Now, signage and branding, when a client walks into a salon, so I go to, I know it doesn't look like it, but I go to salons quite a bit because I love getting my head shaved. Now, I've got a couple of people I go to who are self-employed barbers, and I walk into the shop. I don't walk into a shop with different entities in it, and that's how it should look. So every single person that works as an individual self-employed entity in your salon must show a little sign above the mirror saying who they are, what their address is, and that address should be different to yours. They can't have the same business address as you. And that's in case something goes wrong. So if something does go wrong, who do I go to? You know, so the client comes back in, so let's say I get, you know, a mole chopped off and I'm not happy about it, it's my favourite mole. I go back into the salon, hey guys, yeah, no, so-and-so, you know, Pete took the mole off, I'm not happy about this, you know, how do I serve him papers? And they should be able to point to his sign that says where I serve them. The other reason that you have to do that is because if a client walks into a salon, they have to clearly distinguish which business they are going to. And one of the ways I explain this is if you've ever been to a crafts market or one of those big, railway sheds that's been turned into a craft market. And as you walk through that craft market, you can buy arts and craft and furniture over here and furniture over there. You see a load of different entities and they've all got their own little signs, exactly the same thing. And that's how we should be presenting ourselves with our signage. Clients should know which business they are engaging with, not, Barber Brown, as I ran, and yeah, come in. Yeah, no, you can go with anyone, but they're all self-employed, so they should know that, Jack Frost is working at Barber Brown because Jack Frost has got his own signage, his own cards, its own branding, etc., etc. There should be a price list. They should be displaying a price list somewhere, and that price list, these were written in 1996, so I would suggest if they displayed a price list online somewhere, you'd probably be okay with that because the world's changed slightly. But it should be displaying their business, and that's hugely important, okay? So they must be independent. They can come and go as they please. You can't do this, the shop's open till 5 and you're agreeing to work in that shop between 9 AM and 5 PM. And I've had that in my contracts before, where I've said you're agreeing to the hours of 9 to 5 Monday to Friday, or 9 to 3 on Saturday, and you're agreeing that you will work those hours to their full extent. That creates control, and that in your contract alone, and I believe, I'll try and dig it out, but I believe there's one that has been deemed as disguised employee because that was written in the contract. So they need to be able to come and go as they please. They need to have access, ideally, their own access to the building. So if you have got a manager in your salon who opens the salon in the morning and lets everyone in, then as these judiciary sort of get tighter and tighter on what we can and can't do, I predict that's going to be one that comes up. They must be able to make a profit and a loss at will. So that means they've had a quiet month, you don't help them out. And that means that, and there's a lot of industry coaches or advisors, or calling themselves industry coaches and advisors, saying that you should negotiate your day rate, and you should negotiate, or you should create your day rate over 48 weeks, but so people get a bit of holiday and they don't have to pay for being in holidays. That's not how it works. You set your rent, and that rent should be paid on a weekly or a monthly basis, 12 months of the year or 52 weeks of the year. That is them being in business, and that is them being able to make a profit and a loss. And I know when I was in business, if I went on holiday or I closed my business for 10 days, I made a loss. And that's what it means by making profit and loss. So, no rent relief. None. You can't, I wouldn't even stretch to the imagination of doing it. Now, there's probably some people out there saying, like, oh, you'd be clever about the counting, you can charge them for 52 weeks over 48. No, because as soon as you charge them for 52 weeks over 48 weeks, you're giving them 4 weeks where they're not making a profit or loss, or they're not open to making a loss. So you need to charge them on a monthly, every month, all the time. They need to deal with complaints. Now, I've had this a lot, and if I'd been put under this scrutiny, back in, let's say, 2015, 2016. 2015, I had a fairly serious complaint with someone who felt that their scalp had been burnt by bleach, by someone who really, she just made a mistake, but I dealt with it. And actually I shouldn't have dealt with it. I should have allowed her to deal with it. So if someone comes back with a dodgy fringe trim, you've got to send it back to the person who did the dodgy fringe trim. And that's that simple. Dealing with complaints or issues by themselves means that they are independent and they are in business for themselves. The other big thing is there too, is there's one judgment, and I'll try and put it up here, where quality control was deemed as being disguised employee or employer. Now that quality control in that time was someone was put through a trade test before they started in a salon. And I mean, God forbid. If we're not doing trade tests, you're not in business. We're not hairdressers. Of course we do trade tests. But if you're self-employing someone, you effectively can't really do a trade test because now there's a judgment out there that says that that's the interpretation of independence or of someone being genuinely self-employed. So, you know, you can get any mixed bag, you know, and of course that will stretch to qualification. So you'll get people coming in with no qualification going, yeah, I want to be a barber. Yeah, no, I'm fine, I'm doing really well. I've been doing a few mates, you know, at the pub, and, you know, it's a really good change of career for me, and, you know, I just want to make good money. And so they come in, and you've got no control over that. If you engage them, you can't say, well, actually, you're not qualified, you can't do the job, you know. So that's one other area you've got to look at. Hold their own insurance. Now, I know of probably the 20 self-employed salons in my local area that none of them hold their own insurance. And that insurance is for public liability and product liability, and it's here in the guidelines. They need to choose and use their own products. And this is a tricky one, because if you've got a brand, and as a salon I had a brand, my brand was Barber Brown. Barber Brown used ASP colour, and we were a specialist, a salon specialist with ASP colour. That now is enough to say I'm not allowing people to choose their own brands. So unless I'm Barber Brown and I'm using my own salon and my own products, you really can't get involved in it. And if you're supplying the products, and some people do supply products, there are people out there I've coached or I've advised over the last sort of 6 weeks even, who are saying like, yeah, but it's easier because we all use Weller or we all use L'Oreal. And it's like, that's fine, I get that. I absolutely empathise with it. It's easier if you all use the same colour. But if you're supplying it, you're only supplying one, they're not making a choice. So they need to choose what they use, and it needs to be open to choosing what they use. So if you, like me, I was ASP, and someone came in with, you know, a big tub of L'Oreal bleach, and I went, that breaks my contract with ASP, you can't use it, then actually that breaks my contract with my self-employed stylist. So that's the next one. Be free to sell or dispose of their business, i.e. sell their client list and the license agreement they have with you. They should be free to do that. And, you know, that's a weird one really, because a lot of people won't do that. They'll just move mobile, or they'll move shops, or they'll move wherever, and the clients left behind will get absorbed by whoever else is in there. But the client list is the interesting one. If you control the client list, or if you hold the client list on your software for self-employed people, there is a very strong argument to say that you're in breach of GDPR. In fact, I don't think you've got an argument against it. So if you're doing the self-employed model and you've got self-employed stylists, they have to have their own client list. They have to have free access to it. And if we look again at this one here, this shows that actually the judiciary see that as what it is. Then we also have to look at things like control via an app. Now this comes up with Uber and Deliveroo, I think, as well. Any of those app-based self-employed gig economy things. Control by an app means that the app's not allowing them to choose their own or set their own prices. Now, there's one judgment where someone was using Cancellation Watch. Now Cancellation Watch, if you're running a salon, is brilliant, because if someone cancelled, there's a list ready, boom, bang, they all get a text, and most of the time you can fill that appointment quite quickly, and that keeps your white space down. But if you're all self-employed and you're using Cancellation Watch, it means that through the app or your software, you are then controlling and keeping an eye on their business. So that creates not only control, but I would argue mutuality of obligation. And that, again, has already been judged, and I believe here it is here. So, the next one is, and this is the one that people are hearing a lot of, and these are the two changes that you really need to sort of be really clear on. They need to be able to send a substitute. Now, when they talk about this, they talk about the unfettered right. Now, unfettered, and I believe that's a word, yeah. So, the unfettered right means that you've got no control over it. So, if I was working in your salon and I decided on Monday, you know what, I can't be bothered today, I'm going to send my dad in. Dad's 74, Dad's, you know, like a bit grumpy. Dad's couldn't have a clue how to cut hair. I mean, he's got a little bit of a clue, but you know, I'm going to send him in. He's going to do my work for me. You can't do anything about that. That's it. It's their business. You just got to stand there and go like, okay. And are we going to do that? I don't think so. In fact, I know so. But that needs to be written in their contract. So in their contract, it must state that they have the unfettered right to sale and dispose and to send a substitute. Because they're able to send a substitute, and when it gets to tribunal, if it gets to tribunal, tribunal is going to look at the contract and go, okay, that's the contract. They're also going to look and they're going to put more weight on what's actually happening. So it might be in your contract, and I know from some industry contracts that it is in there, but the reality is it doesn't happen. And that's what the judiciary and the tribunal are very good at teasing out. The reality is that they won't be sending in a substitute. And I believe if I've got a judgment on that, I'll put that up here, because I believe it's commented on. I'll have a look and put it in through the editing. The next one is something that's come up since the April 2020 and the Good Working Plan, and these two sort of changes that come along with here are the things that are real kickers. And the first one is they must also be working for competitors. Notice I said plural. Now, what that means is that for them to not be a worker, or for them to not be meeting that ready-mix concrete test, they need to have more than one other client, so to speak. So if they work for you, you used to be able to say, and I've said it, well, they've got loads of clients, they come in, they do 20 a day. But when they are engaged by you, they need to have more than one other engager. And it means the percentage of their time that they work needs to be sort of less than 40%. So it needs to be less than the majority of their time. And if it is the majority of their time, then there's a very, very strong chance that you're actually got a worker, not a self. Let's just go back. In nearly 20 years, since 96 and before 96, so it stretches on pre-96, we've kind of blurred the lines and created this cultural norm of self-employed. And that cultural norm you can see on sort of social media quite regularly, and that's usually people going, I've got a space, self-employed, must be sort of 5 years experience, got to have, like some clients, but we've got loads, or column waiting, which is I used to do all the time. Column waiting, self-employed, you'll earn 500 a month. So when I was a salon owner, I opened my salon in 2011, and by 2015 I had 4 shops. And I grew hugely, really, really quickly. And I was able to do that because of how the taxation is applied to the self-employed model. And I'll go through that in a moment. But until 2017, I was just bumbling along, and then that raid. And it was a raid. They came in with a warrant at 7 o'clock on a Thursday night, and they walked in with a warrant, and they had all this information off my social media, and they basically said, we need to see your books. Now, you've got a choice when you get a VAT raid, and I'll do a video on how to handle a VAT raid, because I did used to work for the tax office, but don't tell anyone. Basically, the best thing you can do is open your books and go, yep, there you go. That's it. That is how you handle a tax raid. You cop it on the chin, and you open your books and go, here you go. So, at the time, my transferable skills, I understood what was going on. And the taxman, call him Harry HMRC, as I have done for about 20 years now, he said, can you demonstrate that these people are self-employed? Now, me, being the smart ass that I am, I said, they're a separate entity, and they are. They're a separate legal entity, and the onus is on them to do that, not me. Let's move on. We move on to April 2020 and the Good Working Plan. April 2020 and the Good Working Plan says that you, as the engager, need to assess the employment status of anyone who is working for you. Which means you can't do what I did and give them the smart ass answer that it's up to them, not me. It means that you've got to demonstrate that you've done it. And that's one of the biggest changes. Because if the taxman came in, and they will and they do, there are people getting minimum wage audits across the country as we speak. And minimum wage audits are a legitimate way for the taxman to enter your business, to see what you're doing, to look at your books, and if you respond with, there's nothing to do with us, mate, you're all self-employed, you just got yourself a self-employed audit. And they legitimately can do that. So because the Good Working Plan says you've got to assess that, you need to show that you've assessed it. And that comes down to all of those things I've talked about before. You've got to make sure you're compliant with all of them. So, why is the taxman so interested in this? And our industry, this is not just our industry. Like, you know, there's a friend on social media who's put quite a few other industries up, from horse groomers. I have a friend who is, well, I've got two friends. One who's a teacher, not just two, I've got more than two friends, obviously. But, well, actually, maybe only two friends. But if we look at it, one's a teacher, he does supply. And up until about 3-4 months ago, he was paid a day rate. But they've stopped it, and they've stopped it because of exactly what I'm talking of here. I've got another friend who is a funeral director. Now, he's got 5 engages. So that means he goes and gets work and does funerals for 5 different funeral homes. So he, at the very least, or the very worst, he could be seen as a worker. But it's not as likely, because he's got 5 different engages. And horse groomers is another one. I think I mentioned that. And there's quite a lot of people going, like, this isn't right, we're missing out on national insurance and things like that. So national insurance, pensions is one thing, but here's the other one. And let's just start doing some quick math. Now, I'm a hairdresser. Yes, I'm a hairdresser, so my math is shocking. And if I get this math wrong, put it in the comments, abuse me, tell me how crap I am at maths, because the more comments I get, the more people see the video, so you go for it. Right, so basically, let's say we've got 3 stylists taking 1k a week, and times that by 52 weeks. Alright, so we're talking about a turnover of 156k, and I've already spotted a mistake because people generally take 4 weeks holidays here, so 48. But anyway, ignore that mistake, just go with the flow here. So you're talking about 156k coming into the business. Now, on the self-employed model, generally we were running on a 50% commission or a 60% commission. So the engager, that's you, and you could be one of these stylists, but let's say you're not, let's make it easy. You only take half of that. So that means that you're taking 78k or around 80k. Now, the VAT threshold in the UK is 88,000. So if you're under the VAT threshold, you don't need to register for VAT. So keeping yourself under the VAT threshold is one of the reasons why we make this legitimate decision to become self-employed, which is perfectly legitimate. I know some of you are sitting there throwing shit at your TV or your phone because you pay VAT, national insurance and all this, and it's not fair, but it is legitimate. I'm sorry, but it is okay to do. So the problem is, employment law recognises a worker, VAT law doesn't. VAT law recognises employed and self-employed, and a worker is basically a form of employee. Now, 20% of the 156k is 36 grand. If you were deemed to have self-employed or disguised employees who are actually self-employed, then the DAT man is able to sue you for the VAT that they're going to collect. They are able to go back, I believe it's 7 years. So 7 times 36 is just over 210 grand. Now that's just for the VAT portion. Then you've got national insurance, then you've got pensions, then you've also got, pretty sure you'd be getting a fine as well. So you can look at some quite substantial sums if you're not getting this right. And, you know, fighting that with what's come through in judiciary is now going to become very difficult. And I'll be honest, I know people who run self-employed models very, very compliantly, and the usual thing that they're not doing that I advise them that they should be doing is each individual stylist putting their details on the mirror so that it's obvious who they're going to. So there are people running this properly, but then there are a lot of people who've been caught in the cultural norm, who believe it's okay and quite legitimately think, you know, I'm self-employed, I'm doing what everyone else is doing because that's what they did with me and that's what my boss did before and that's what the guy up the road does. And actually, because this has changed in the background, what they were doing as a cultural norm is no longer allowed. It's a bit like smoking. I sat and wrote this out in the pub, and I had to sit out the back because I like to have a fag. And a pint and a fag and sit and write out a video. Culturally, go back 20 years ago, whatever it was, I could have sat anywhere in the pub, in the nice warm spot in the corner by the fire. Had a smoke, done it, but we're not allowed to smoke in jobs anymore. So it's the same, similar thing. It's like law has changed. People have interpreted it differently, and you need to be aware, and this is why we do these videos. This is why people online who will challenge you on the self-employed, like, no, I won't mention their names, but you know, they will challenge it because they know that you're just doing what you thought was okay to do. We all did. I did. And, you know, we can't anymore. We have to be really compliant with it. The other really big change that's happened, if we go back to our timeline for a bit, is somewhere between 2018-19 we started getting industry-specific judgments in tribunal. And some of these I put up already. But these judgments are basically what's changing the interpretation of what we can and can't do. Now, it's not working out for salon owners here. And I mean, really, it's not. If we look at these judgments, they all pretty much use the ready-mix concrete test. Now, there is another test, it's called the auto cleanse test, and I'm sure there are other employment tests, but under the ready-mix concrete test, they used a multi-test factor to determine that. So they use several different tests to bring together that one ready-mix concrete test. And again, I'm not a lawyer, so if you're a lawyer and you can explain exactly what I'm talking of there, please add it in the comments. It would be greatly useful. So the ready-mix concrete test says basically there needs to be a personal service. Okay, so personal service means that I have to do it myself, or your engaged person has to do it themselves. This is where that right to substitution is. And actually, if I were running a self-employed model, I wouldn't just be saying that they had the right to substitution. I'd be asking them to demonstrate and have someone substitute for them at some point. Because you know, if they're doing it, you can evidence that they're doing it. The next one is it needs to be for remuneration. Now that remuneration includes them paying rent. So they're paying rent to you and they're making money in your shop as an engaged individual, there's remuneration involved. Level of control. Prices, health and safety, insurance, clients, dress, another big one. And I see some big names doing this as a collective of self-employed, and I'd strongly recommend you stop immediately. Training. If you're training them, you're doing quality assurance, and let's get that quality assurance one back up. You can't be involved in doing it, even if your product company's paying for it. They're paying for it through you, and you can't do it. Now the other one is integrated into the salon. I'm going to go into that one in a little bit of a sec. And of course then there's mutuality of obligation. For instance, if your self-employed leaves and you say to them, or write it, I got you those clients, therefore they're mine. You've just given yourself, or your self-employed person, an open door to take you through court. Like literally, you've just created mutuality of obligation. So if you got them the clients, let it go. They're gone. And you know, by saying that they're yours, and I've done this before, and sorry Sarah, in retrospect, I was wrong. And I was completely wrong. Knowing now what I know, if I was pinned for what I was doing back then, which was people would leave and I'd go, no, they're my clients, because I paid for them, and I felt that, you know, I built this business, I built that, yeah, sure, you've helped, absolutely, you've been integral, but I paid for them, and that's my business, my future, my pension. So under the self-employed, you can't do that in any way, shape or form. Under the employed, you've got restrictive covenants, and I've got some videos coming up on them because I've had some whale of a time over the last couple of years with that one. But mutuality of obligation is the last one. You're obliged to find the clients, and they're obliged to do the work. That means you're in the doo-doo. So thanks. And again, that can go through software and even someone walking in. So the ones that are doing this well, what are they doing that's different to the ones that aren't doing this well, or perhaps to yourself? Okay. So first of all, they don't advertise. So they don't have, and I used to do that. I used to spend a fortune on advertising, and very different advertising too. And I used to do it all the time. It was a consistent, constant thing that I did as a businessman. And basically, they don't advertise. They leave their stylist individually to advertise. Now, whether that's through social media or any other way, that's up to them. They don't have anything to do with it. They don't advertise. They merely have a space, and these people rent these chairs. Their stylist have contact with their clients. There is no way of them booking an appointment for a client. They have to book with even a walk-in. A walk-in walks in and says, "Yeah, can I get my hair cut?" And the guy who owns the shop goes, "Yeah, there's 4 hairdressers, choose one." They don't go, "Yeah, who would you like?" They don't say, "Oh, when would you like it for?" They say, "There's those hairdressers, off you go." That's it. That's all they have to do with it. They don't answer the phone. They don't have main receptions. You know, they still have a phone, but they don't have a reception advertised phone that people ring up and go, "Hey, I want a haircut here." One has a website, and that website has a list to all the contact details of the self-employed people that are on there. Now, that one I think is a good idea, but I've got a feeling that as these things get tighter and tighter, might come under some scrutiny. So who knows where that will be. All of their staff pay rent, and some pay service charges all year, every day of the year, all the time, no matter what. If you haven't paid your rent for yesterday, they stop you from working today. Simple as that. You know, there's no, yeah, it's all right, we'll do it at the end of the week. It's fine. It doesn't happen. If you didn't pay yesterday, you don't pay today. End of. You lose the money for today. Can't have you in here, because that would be creating, it wouldn't be at a loss. So, they have clear agreements and insurance. Interestingly, none of them have got industry standard agreements. Industry standard agreements of what's been failing in the judiciary. So if you've got industry standard agreements, and if you know what I'm talking about here, you know what I'm talking about. But if you've got them, I would strongly suggest that you change them, and change them very, very quickly, because they have been failing in the courts, and it's not been working out well for the salon owners. The other thing too there is that in my experience over the last sort of 18 months, the HR companies that normally deal with our industry have started to withdraw those agreements. So they've started to withdraw the licenses or rent-a-chair agreements that they're actually putting out. And I think personally, again, not a lawyer, but I think it's because they don't want to take the risk. Because there is so much more risk involved now, they don't want to get involved with that. And they don't want to be seen to have been supporting it. And possibly they're unable to get insured for it. So that's it. Stylists set their own prices and send in substitutes. And the substitute one's very rare. I've only actually seen it once, but they're all able to. If you can't do today, we'll get someone else to do it for you. That's the other one. And 6, there's no providing of training or products. Everyone provides their own. You know, I do know of one that provides the products, but he sells the products, and he has a range, 3 different ranges that they can choose from. So they can go and get the product, yep, 1, 2 or 3, up to you. And it's sold to them in 20cc, you know, like H2O is 20 cc's, or H2O2 rather. A tube is sold as a tube or a half tube, and you know, that makes it work, but they're able to choose between whichever one they want. And I think last time I saw that, there was probably about 3 permanent colour brands, and I think 2 semi-colours, and then there was like Crazy Colour, Pulp Riot, so they can choose, they can pick what they want to. So that's a choice, that seems to be okay. But there's 2 major issues now, and these are the 2 major issues that really at the forefront of HMRC at the moment from my experience. And you know, my experience is quite in depth. These 2 experiences, they've come about, and they seem to be prevalent in a lot of the guidance and advice that is put out by government at the moment. And the advice was changed August 22. We had new guidance came out, and new interpretations of the same laws. One of those is exclusivity of service. Remember I said before, they need to be working for more than one engager. HMRC are basically saying this is enough, so they need to be working for your competitors, plural. they need to be doing 30% in one, 30% another, and 30% a third. Round about there. Now let's look at that and let's just do a little bit of a geography. Bristol, fine. You could work for me, you could probably work for someone a couple of suburbs that way, and you could work for someone else a couple of suburbs that way. And really there's not going to be a lot of overlap between clients, and probably be okay. You know, it's new, we'd all start going like, this is a bit different, but okay, we've got to do it, so it's doable. But if you were in, say, like a little village like Wootton Under Edge, which is, you know, up the road from me, are you going to be okay with the person that you're engaging in your salon, that you've built up, that you've put your money into, that is your reputation, your livelihood? You're going to be okay with them working for someone 3 doors down the road because they're in a smaller village, and the prospect of them getting work outside the village, it's not as big, it's not as easy. So that's going to change, I think, predominantly how we look at salons, because that's going to be very difficult. So they need to work for more than one. The other one is integrated into the business, and judgments get tighter. I predict this is going to be a real issue, and it basically means they can't help each other. Now, I've been doing this I've been doing it for 36 years, and I don't think there's been any time in my 36 years where I haven't just naturally gone to help someone who needed help. Or majority of people that have worked with me or around me or for me haven't just gone and helped people out just as the natural basis of what they do. And here's the problem. The self-employed 1 shampooing for self-employed 2 when the salon isn't around could mean that while you're not there, the people that are working or engaged by you are actually creating the issue for you while you're not there. And that's, that's a big one. But whether that takes like grip and becomes an issue or not is yet to be seen. I think it will, and I think it will be as people start to maybe be a bit quieter because we've got high inflation and a recession, and as stylists start to go, well, hang on, I'm disguised, obviously, because so-and-so did a shampoo for me. It could end up creating a problem. So I would be having clear boundaries and clear things in contracts that you are there to work on your own business, and you are not to help or take help from others, and any doing of that is, there'll be some legal parlance you could put in there. So, alright. Number 3, the other big issue, sharing clients. And this is a difficult one because your clients come in, client A comes into salon B and uses stylist 1, 2 and 3. The question that is going to be asked is, whose client is it? And this issue will be, or may even already be, decided in tribunal. And for me, I think they'll say it's the salon's client. And I think they'll say it's the salon's client unless the salon can say, these are 3 separate entities, and all 3 of them have seen the client, and all 3 of them have that client on their database. So taking clients, I would be, there's no way of controlling this, no way of telling people they have to do this because it creates control, but I would be saying that you need to take your client details. But sharing clients, someone somewhere is going to have an issue and use it as an issue within the industry. And so there's a couple of ways people are getting caught out. One is, as I said before, we've got these minimum wage audits. Those minimum wage audits then trigger self-employed audits, and some people are getting caught out through that. I know of 2, I think 3 in the last 2 years that I've personally helped with. There's the next one is these judgments. These are self-employed people who have gone, I'm not self-employed, and if you read through the judgments, in some cases they're definitely not self-employed. They're really nowhere near it. They're taking people to court. Now, if you're getting that, so if you're running a self-employed business and someone has decided they want to take you to tribunal and claim to be self-employed, claim to be employed, then you really need to take some serious expert advice. And I mean, your starting point is someone like me, but you actually want to get advice from like an employment lawyer who understands our industry. I would not just be sitting there going like, oh, well, it's crap, like the contract says this. Because when it gets to court, again, the contract, they'll look at it, yeah, okay, here's your contract. But they'll want to see what the reality of the situation is. And demonstrating some of these things is going to be extremely difficult unless you're super squeaky clean. So that's the other way in which they get in court. So as a part of all this, we end up with this clash. I kind of touched on it earlier. There's this clash between the self-employed model and the employed model, and people want the fair playing field and all that kind of thing. And the simple truth, the big picture, that is that both are legitimate. And one of the ways in which you could be looking at, oh, they're getting away with it, not doing it properly. And it's the same way as, you know, the guy down the road runs a barber shop and he says they're employed, gives them cash, doesn't run a payroll. You know, all that's happening here is that the two ways of doing this are coming under the same amount of scrutiny as there were before. And if you ask me, this is actually what's going to create a fair playing field. I think the industry will look extremely different if people who are running the self-employed model stopped running it the way culturally we started to do it, or been doing it for some time, and started running it the way we are expected to run it, and put the onus on the stylist to build their column, to build their business, to let them sell their business, to let them work up the road. And I think because of those caveats, those new things that have come out, which is the exclusivity of service and the embedding into the organisation, I think those things are going to be the things that are the tipping point for your decisions as to whether you do the self-employed model or the employed model. Both are legitimate, both can be successful. In my experience, the employed model is a lot more hard work, but you are still able to get to a point of being successful. You still can make money by embracing VAT, national insurance, pensions, holidays, etc., etc. But the question I have is, will the scrutiny that's coming under both models now, because remember the minimum wage audit is also auditing the employment side, will that scrutiny mean that we'll end up in time with actually a fair playing field? Soon to find out. Like, comment, subscribe, all that kind of thing. Thank you. See you at the next one.